Hello and welcome back to Analysis, where we've been talking about the treatment of migrants by the state. Removal centres are one of the more contentious issues concerning the treatment of immigrants and asylum seekers in the UK. Some have lauded them as an effective and efficient way of processing people seeking to remain in Britain, while others say they are dehumanising and demeaning. Certainly, the recent death of an 84-year-old Canadian man detained at Harmondsworth Removal Centre has put these centres in a very bad light. Islam Channel spoke to another ex-detainee about her experiences in one of these centres.
I was detained for nearly 8 months, and it was a very distressing time for me because it took me aback so much. Before I was detained in this country, was much better than I am now, although I'm out of detention now. I have a problem with memory now. I cannot remember things that I've done 3 days ago, whatever, or what I've done yesterday. I have to scratch my head. It's really upsetting. I lost a lot of friends. I lost my self-esteem. I don't feel the same anymore. I know being an asylum seeker is like on the bottom of the community. Yes, it's true, but it's even worse than that because it's being in detention. I even feel afraid to walk into the bank or what. I feel I'm a different person to other people I meet on the street. And I hope I'm so grateful for medical justice because they came to detention center. They looked after me. They made a medical report for me because I had all the scars and all the evidence that I had before I left my country through the torture. They took all the scars and made a medical report through which I got bail from the detention center and I was released after 8 months.
Well, joining me in the studio to discuss this is Jerome Phelps, the Director of Detention Action, and Awale Olad, Public and Parliamentary Affairs Officer at the Migrant Rights Network. Jerome, I believe just this morning you presented a report to the all-party parliamentary group on detention.
Yes, this report really goes to the heart of the problem. As you say, that they're called immigration removal centres, but increasingly the Home Office is not using them actually to remove migrants. People are detained there for periods of months and sometimes years when they can't go back to their country of origin, even if they want to. So the report is on this issue of people who are unreturnable to their country of origin, particularly from countries like Somalia, Iran, Palestine, where even if they want to go back, there are bureaucratic or safety, human rights issues that mean that it's impossible for them to be sent back. But they find themselves locked up in what are effectively high security prisons for periods of years and eventually released. And we commissioned research in the past that's found that £76 million is wasted on detaining people who can't be sent back and are released. But more important than that is the human cost of being locked up without a time limit, without trial, without any automatic judicial oversight, just because you're a migrant.
I find it shocking that this is happening in our country, and frankly, I feel ashamed that I have not been fully aware of the extent of it until you've just explained it. Awale, are you fully aware of the numbers of people that are locked up for years in such centres?
Absolutely. The most recent figure is 957 people are locked up for literally committing no crime apart from being asylum seekers. So,
but why do you think we're unaware of it, that these things are going on? And I would say the general public don't seem to be fully informed.
Sadly, it's not a sexy subject for the media, I'm afraid. It's apart from your left-leaning Guardian readers who would probably have a sniff of what's going on. Most of the right-wing press are probably in support of locking up migrants and throwing the key away.
Jerome, but coming back to your report, what are you hoping to achieve by this report?
What we're calling for is a time limit on detention. The UK is actually unique in Europe in having no limit for how long an unelected bureaucrat can lock you up without trial for being a migrant. Every other European country has a time limit, 45 days in France.
And what time limit are you proposing?
We're calling for 28 days. We're pushing for discussion of that in Parliament.
But do you think it's necessary to lock people up at all? Why can't we just give people a tag or whatever, but do we need to lock them up?
I mean, detention should be absolutely minimised. In the vast majority of cases, it's not necessary. The evidence from states that have tried different approaches is that even from an immigration control perspective, even if you're only concerned about how many migrants are sent back, working with migrants in the community, giving them options to to plan their futures, you actually get higher rates of people returning voluntarily than are returned from these very expensive detention centres at a fraction of the public money.
Wally, what alternative should there be to these detention or removal centres?
Well, better effective decision making on asylum applications. I mean, that's the way out of this quagmire of problems. If the government's intention was to actually be effective in allowing asylum seekers to stay, genuine asylum seekers to stay, then they would be processing their applications a lot quicker than they do it at the moment. The problem, again, is what we discussed earlier, is about numbers. They're trying to reduce numbers down.
But in your experience, what's wrong with the system? Is it that we don't have sufficient staff to deal with, or is it an attitude problem?
I think Jerome would be best placed to answer that one, to be honest.
I think there's been a much documented culture of disbelief that means that the wrong people are refused leave to remain. But even where people may not have good grounds to stay in this country, the government there's this reliance on detention enforcement, this assumption that migrants don't comply unless they're treated like criminals. Whereas in fact, if you treat me like a criminal and I'm not a criminal, I'm not going to cooperate with you. It's as though there's this war between states and migrants that the government wants to whip up in order to look tough to the tabloids.
How much do they distinguish between what you would say the economic migrant, the person who just wants to come here for a better life, and then people who are genuinely seeking asylum because of persecution for whatever reason back home?
I think they all end up in detention. When you have such poor decision making, it's very difficult to distinguish who's a genuine refugee, who is married to a British person and has British children and should have the right to stay for those reasons.
And Wally, is the problem the criteria we use in trying to make judgments, or is it more just a system that's not fit for purpose?
Well, the economic migrant system, there is no economic migrant system, but there is a points-based system where if you're an economic migrant, you have to be able to satisfy one of those criteria. The asylum and refugee system is completely different. Usually asylum seekers come here because they've been persecuted, they're running away from something, they're seeking a better life. So sometimes the comparison is very difficult to make. For example, I was a refugee in the early 90s. I was fleeing civil war in Somalia. I mean, if I came here and I was subjected to detention and I was told to go home or whatever, I don't know where I'd be, because I came in during a...
So you've noticed quite a change in attitude from
Absolutely.
the 90s?
Absolutely. In the early 90s, the country was a lot more compassionate. They were a lot more welcoming. People actually said, we have to, look after people who are being persecuted. I mean, you just look at the issue that's going on in Syria at the moment. You've got hundreds, even thousands of people camped out in Calais. All the European countries are saying, no, we don't want you, go away. But where are they supposed to go back to?
But Jerome, do we have a parliamentary group that is overseeing this particular issue?
We have a group of parliamentarians who are really interested in the issue and who want to promote discussion.
So
of it.
it's an all-party group. It doesn't
informal,
have any statutory. It's not like a select committee. That
no, it's not a formal group, but it's an informal group of cross-party parliamentarians, MPs and peers who are interested in the issue.
But interested and deeply concerned to change the laws is two different things. And are you hopeful that we could change that interest into a determination to change law?
I think the manifestos will be very interesting. I think certainly some of the people in various parties who are involved in drafting manifestos are interested in these issues and are talking to the migrants who are going through it. And I think that's what's really missing so often from the debate on immigration, is the voices of the migrants who experience these policies, who are treated in this inhuman way by anonymous bureaucrats.
Well, we've got this new immigration bill, Awale, in process now. I think the third reading is to come up in the Commons fairly soon. Where is it taking us?
Well, actually, it's quite interesting because we haven't got to the report stage or even the third reading.
I thought the report stage had started. It hasn't.
No, it
yet.
was supposed to start at the end of November, but
Yes.
a Tory backbencher threw a spanner in the works by introducing an amendment that would have actually said that would have restricted Romanians or Bulgarians for another 5 years before being able to have access to our labour market. So it's really interesting at the moment with what's going on in the Conservative Party and immigration bill.
I mean, I had a quick look at the bill.
The bill is very, very hostile. I mean, the bill came straight after the go home vans came.
Yes.
So the go home vans were kind of the warm-up act for the most hostile bit of legislation this country's ever had, and it's the most. And the bill is actually, the slogan for the bill is the most hostile bit of law against immigrants in the UK. So the proposals in the bill include restricting people's rights of appeal. So at the moment you've got 14 different aspects of appeal you can do. They want to restrict it and bring it all the way down to 4, which means you won't be able to no longer be appeal on the human rights. Restricting access to private housing, restricting access to a bank account, restricting access to a licensing, a driving license, not being able to access the NHS. I mean, there's huge
But
provisions
some
in
of
the bill.
these are basic human rights and reflected in the Declaration of Human Rights. You know, the right of access to education, home, a decent life, and so forth. Why do you think now we're doing this? Why are we introducing such a bill that seems so alien to British culture and values?
Well, for 2 reasons. The first is because the government, again, is committed to reducing immigration to tens of thousands. It's very difficult to do that in such an economic, liberal economy like we have, because it will always attract immigrants to come here and work and make better lives for themselves. Number 2, because the judges keep adjudicating in favour of immigrants when they exercise their human rights. So the government doesn't like that. The tabloids don't like that.
But Jerome, are there any hard facts that back up the government concern, or the concern of the general population, you might say, at least that's reflected in some of the tabloid press?
No, I think in most areas of government policy, when you're drafting a new law, you start from a problem of what's going wrong and then you fix the problem. But if you look at this bill, it's just not written like that. The problems are brought in after the fact. It's all about coming up with gestures that look tough to the tabloids.
So is it a question of political timing rather than genuine concern?
It's about the concerns of UKIP voters and potential UKIP voters, I would suggest.
But let's just stay on that, the concerns of this group of people that are described like that. Now, do you think there is any real base to their concern, or do you think it is being a perception that is being magnified out of all proportion?
I think that if you spoke to somebody who was voting UKIP or considering voting UKIP and talked to them about what actually happens to migrants in this country, if you took them to a detention centre to meet Abdul, who I interviewed for this research, is in his 4th year of detention after being tortured in Sudanese prisons. I think then that would change people's minds.
But I take that. But then look at the issue, and I'm just putting the devil's advocate, you might say, case, in that you look at the issue where someone in the East End of London, where I live, may have been on a housing list for years and years and years of their children, and they haven't got any offer of a house, and yet they see relatively recent migrants arriving and being offered those premises. Now, do you think that gives rise to the sort of attitudes we're finding now?
Well, actually, immigrants aren't entitled to housing. That's, it's the law. You're not entitled to housing. The provision within the immigration bill is to restrict them from private housing. So everyone's entitled to private housing.
Yes.
It's just to stop you from getting it.
That's very interesting.
Yeah,
so that, in fact, we're depriving them of shelter.
Yeah, basically. That's. I mean, the whole bill is to smoke out irregular migrants. I mean, it's trying to bring people out, or it's trying to get your landlord to shop you. It's trying to get the doctor you go see to say, oh, this guy's an illegal immigrant. You know, I need to call the Home Office. It's getting the bank to say this person is of different colour. I think there could be an illegal immigrant. You know, let me call the Home Office.
So policing by extension.
Yeah,
in a sense.
It's absolutely. It's basically creating a hostile environment between British people and immigrants. It's absolutely nothing else apart from
what are. Sorry.
I think it's in everyone's interest to have an immigration system that works. No, migrants don't want to be stuck in limbo for years without the right to be here. But what this bill and what the government is doing is not actually addressing the ways that the system fails to resolve immigration cases. It's just it's all about generating headlines and making life miserable for some people who are actually in really fragile circumstances already.
But is there not a case to be put for the positive contribution migrants make? And are we failing to put that case across to the general public?
Well, absolutely. I forget the exact figure, but it's billions and billions of pounds every year that migrants add to the Treasury's coffers. They've since 2004, when the Polish migrants came in, has added 1% to our GDP. It's incredible the amount that immigrants bring into the country in terms of skills, in terms of hard work, in terms of all the other different qualities they bring with them, and diversity they bring to certain parts of the UK. The problem is there is a section that actually puts that particular point forward, but most of the time it's the Daily Mail wants to concentrate on a Romanian pickpocket or something. It's quite ridiculous the way
negative perception.
The negative perception. I don't even know if it sells anymore. But the problem is it's that particular kind of longing for a time past that the Daily Mail wants to.
But maybe campaigning organisations should in fact be gathering facts and figures and actually putting positive images of what migration brings to the country.
Absolutely, we all do that. I mean, we all I'm from the Migrant Rights Network. All we ever do is to campaign for all rights for all immigrants. With that, we have to present a very, very solid vision of migration and how this country can utilise migration for its purposes, for its best purposes. So. We do actually campaign really hard to put a good light of migrants forward, and Jerome's organisation does exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think the trouble with detention is that if you think of someone behind bars, you think of a criminal, and because of being detained, you're almost put into that box of feeling like you're a criminal. So we're working with people who are in detention now and who have been released from detention to try and get their voices out there into the media debate, so they can speak on their own behalf and on behalf of other people in detention about their lives, their experiences, what it was like to be in detention.
Jerome, what do you think will happen to this bill? Will it be passed? Will it become law with these terrible restrictions on people's lives that Awale was describing?
I think it will be passed. I think it will be very difficult to get significant changes to it because it has cross-party support. But I think there's whether it will actually be workable is a big question. Certain provisions, such as the one preventing irregular migrants from renting private accommodation, are just not even close. They're obviously unworkable. They read as though they're not even designed to be workable. It may well be that the government will quietly forget them once they've been introduced.
What impact will it have?
I'm very sceptical that it's going to have much of an impact. It's more about the narrative, it's more about the message of saying, you know, we're going to get immigrants. Most of the time it's just going to push people into rogue landlords.
What can people do?
Write to their MPs, say they're absolutely disgusted by this particular policy and that their MP should vote against it.
Jerome?
I'd agree. The one democratic right we have is to talk to our MPs. I think MPs read the press as well and think that everyone in this country wants migrants out. I think those of us who don't need to be talking to our MPs and saying how strongly we feel.
So you're putting a lot of responsibility actually on MPs, and we have a coming election. Optimistic or not?
I think you have to be optimistic if you're working on migration, but it is MPs' jobs. They are answerable to us, and it's important we don't get shouted out by UKIP.
It's going to be tough. David Cameron over the weekend said that he's going to propose a new immigration policy and a new policy on the welfare state every single week up until the election. So we all know that's politicking for one particular reason, and that's to out-kip the kippers. So I don't think you can ever out-kip the kippers, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for this evening. Do join us again. Thank you very much indeed.